George Miller, The Life of an Extraordinary Psychologist. George Miller was born February 3rd, 1920. He comes from a middle-class family. His father worked at a steel mill and his mother was a teacher. He was an only child and his parents divorced when he was only 7 years old. He took special interests in literature and the arts. For his education, George Miller had a passion for learning. In 1940, he received his bachelor's degree in psychology at the University of Alabama. And this was after he switched from originally studying history and speech. In 1941, he received his master's degree in psychology at Harvard. And he also took part in the drama club. And this is where he met his wife. In 1946, he received his PhD in psychology as well. And after graduating, Miller stayed at Harvard and began his career as an assistant professor. While receiving his master's degree, he met his wife when he originally joined the drama club. Catherine James, his wife, was also a psychology student, and they got married in 1939. They had a son and a daughter shortly after they got married, and Catherine passed away in 1996. George remarried in 2006 to Margaret Page. He George Miller was someone who took his learning very seriously, and that reflected in his work. He worked in many areas, including psychophysics, studies in auditory perception, linguistics, and cognitive psychology. Miller is considered one of the founders of the field of cognitive psychology. One of his famous ideas was 7 plus or minus 2. He wrote a paper in 1956 called The Magical Number 7 plus or minus 2, Some Limits on Our Capacity for Processing Information. According to this theory, someone can only hold 7 items of information at a time, plus or minus 2 items. This theory was famous for trying to quantify short-term memory and the limits of human processing. Another famous idea of his was chunking. Miller wanted to further our knowledge on memory and how humans organize information to process it. Chunking is where you group individual items, which can turn it into one new item after being reorganized. According to this theory, you can remember more information if you group them together. Some famous ways of grouping them together in some of these studies is by phone numbers or taking single digit numbers and grouping them into tens or hundreds when having a longer list of numbers. Tote is another famous idea of his. George Miller did not entirely agree with the behaviorism movement at the time and worked to replace some of its practices. He worked with Eugene Galanter and Karl Pribram to come up with a new behavioral sequence called TOTE, which stood for Test, Operate, Test, Exit. There was original test to gather information if the behavior or the action could be completed. If it could not be completed, the desired action or behavior, then they would operate, and that would be whatever way they need to intervene in order to make that happen. They would then retest for that same action or behavior, and then if they were able to complete that, then they could move on to exit and say that they officially completed the goal or met the goal. If they couldn't, then they would kind of continue through the cycle of operate and test until they can fully exit. He also did a lot of work in linguistics. A large part of George Miller's career was focused on studying language. Miller popularized his works relating to linguistics after writing Computational Linguistics. In the 1980s, Miller also developed WordNet, and WordNet is an online database that showed how semantics and lexicons are related between groups of similar words. Many people helped him work on WordNet, including his wife, Catherine. Each person was tasked with specific parts of speech, and Kitty, which is also what he called Catherine, was in charge of the adjective lexicon, while Miller himself was in charge of nouns. They grouped nouns, verbs, and adjectives into something that they called synsets and organized their semantic relationships. Between Miller, his wife, and many other colleagues, they made tens of thousands of entries and they were all done manually. He was also really interested in child literacy. Um, he wanted to learn how children learned language, and he believed that children would not learn a language as effectively if they were to just read words that they didn't know in a dictionary, which was a common practice in school at the time. When working to understand this hypothesis, he had children look up certain words that they did not already know and then try to use them in a sentence. And just as he predicted, the children would not use them appropriately or accurately for a large majority of the time. Miller and his colleagues started to digitalize books using WordNet to annotate them so then children could read the book on a screen and then click on the words that they did not know. And WordNet provided a context to help the child understand the word within the context of whatever they were reading. Some of his recognition and awards. In 1965, George Miller was chosen as the psychology department chair at Rockefeller University when he worked there. While working at Princeton University, he helped build cognitive neuroscience as an area of study while working on WordNet. He then helped create the Princeton Cognitive Science Laboratory in 1986. Miller also received the National Medal of Science in 1991 and received the Outstanding Lifetime Contribution to Psychology Award from the American Psychological Association in 2003. And for his impact today, George Miller has made a lasting impact in the field of psychology. His work related to 7 plus or minus 2 highlighted the phenomenon on the limit of processing capacity and has encouraged researchers to look more into the specifics of processing and what we can enhance or get, or what can enhance or get in the way of this processing and memory. Because of his work related to chunking, students are taught techniques on how you can combine information, definitions, or even terms to build and rhetorical cues to make it easier to remember later when that information needs to be used in homework, on an exam, or maybe even in daily work. This has also created a push for educational systems to be better structured in a way that is more optimal for learning and processing. As George Miller strived to understand areas within cognitive processing, linguistics, neuroscience, and computer science, he paved a way for interdisciplinary studying. He was a representation on how knowledge in multiple areas of work can give you a background to discover new ideas that have not been seen by others because they may have fallen within the crack between two different subjects. There are some criticisms to his work. Not everyone believed that some of Miller's most famous findings deserved the popularity that they accumulated. Many of those that questioned his methods and ideas back then and to this day are those that think that cognitive psychology does not focus enough on behavior. Those that followed more behaviorist beliefs were worried about the stronger focus on research rather than physical, observable, measurable actions and behaviors. Those who were not in favor of valuing empirical research as highly were concerned about how quantitative data would misrepresent or even entirely miss the intricacies and depth of true human behavior and cognitive processing. In conclusion, George Miller was not just a man that further pioneered the study of cognitive psychology or even a man that dedicated his time to break down some of the fundamentals of linguistics. He was a person who sought out ideas that intrigued him and found ways to build on knowledge that we didn't even have yet. Miller's work in linguistics, cognitive psychology, and even things related to education are some of the big areas that he worked in, which have had a lasting impact on the knowledge we carry today. Just like all other famous psychologists, he has a background that provides the public with insights on how they might have stumbled onto their path of creating and discovering. Thank you.